Give me just a second. All right, do we have everyone named? Good, good, good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As far as I'm aware, that's 4 plus 4. All right. If that's the case, I think we are good to go live, Lydia. You can hit it whenever you're ready.
You are ready to go.
One more second to wait for it to just give it a couple seconds just in case. All right, good afternoon and happy Saturday to everyone watching us online for the 2021 state finals of the Michigan Youth in Government MJP mock trial competition. We've got an exciting round here for you. We've got 2 seasoned teams who did quite well in all the prior rounds earlier this year. And we're really excited that you're all going to be joining us here. So welcome. We've already got all of the teams queued up and ready to go. And without any further ado, I think we are ready to begin. Now calling the case of People of the State of Michigan v. Riley Costello in the Circuit Court for the County of Huron. Do we have the prosecution present and ready to proceed with trial?
Yes, Your Honor.
And defense, counsel for the defense and the defendant, are you present and ready to proceed with trial?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much, counselors. No need to proceed with entering your names on the record. We've already done with that. Before we begin the trial, 1 or 2 housekeeping matters from the judge's end, given that this is a virtual trial. When we're entering evidence in, we'll bring it up virtually. No need to ask to approach the bench or anything like that, or approach opposing counsel. All the evidence will be brought up by the bailiff right on the screen. And other than that, we'll start with the prosecution. Counselors for the prosecution, do you have any housekeeping or pretrial matters to attend to before we begin the trial?
Yes, Your Honor. May the prosecution have aggregated time during questioning?
Yes, we'll allow both the prosecution and the defense to aggregate their limited time between the witnesses, correct?
Thank you. May the prosecution sequester the witnesses?
Yes, all witnesses will be theoretically sequestered with the exception of the defendant, counselor.
And may the prosecution be excused regarding gender pronouns?
If you will make the same leeway if the judge makes any errors in use of gender pronouns during the course of the trial as well, counselor.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, counselor. And from the defense, so everything that was granted for the prosecution is also granted for the defense, but is there anything additional, counselor?
Yes, Your Honor. We would like the motion for reasonable forgiveness of internet connection delays, especially when making objections.
Of course, counselor, we'll handle it on a case-by-case basis. Perhaps we might need to turn off video cameras or something like this, but we'll handle it as it comes up.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all.
All right, thank you, Counselor. I think we are all set with pretrial and housekeeping matters then. We'll begin the trial of People of the State of Michigan v. Riley Costello, Judge Rogers presiding. Prosecution, you can begin with your opening statement when you're ready.
Thank you. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, opposing counsel, my name is Zoe Macaluso, representing the state of Michigan, along with my co-counsel Paige Peters in this action. The police badge on an officer's uniform represents the officer's honor and authority that is used essentially when officers attempt to protect citizens. What's more, the badge is worn on the officer's heart to represent the use of compassion and the preservation of life. The defendant did not act with honor or authority, and the actions that led to Mr. Austin Winthrop's death were done with no compassion and with complete disregard for the preservation of human life. A man has been murdered in what he thought was the safety of his own residence. On the evening of August 27th, an obsessive, armed, and apparently distracted Sergeant Costello entered apartment number 434 in the complex of Starlight Meadows, Building 1, Holly Hills, Huron County. An officer entered an apartment that was not their own, and when faced with an apparent burglar, the defendant disregarded the correct protocol they were trained to follow and shot and killed Austin Winthrop. The defendant left the apartment they now recognize as Mr. Winthrop's and gave the murder weapon over to their partner, Charlie Dobbins. It should be noted, after the defendant left, Winthrop lay dead. The defendant has been rightly charged with second-degree murder. The three elements of second-degree murder are: first, the defendant caused the death of Austin Winthrop; second, the defendant intended to kill; and third, the defendant's actions are not excused or justified. Today, this will be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Two witnesses will be questioned today from the prosecution. One is State Police Detective Avery Solo, who outlined the correct protocol the defendant should have followed once they realized an armed intruder was in a place of residency. The second witness is Starlight Meadows Tenant Emerson L. Palmer. Emerson will show the defendant walked purposely and without hesitation into Austin's apartment. They both will describe what they observed on the night of the 27th. Austin Winthrop's apartment layout displays how close Winthrop was to the couch. The video game controller shows the differences between a gun and the controller. The doormat will establish references the defendant could have used to identify that the apartment the defendant killed Mr. Winthrop in was his own, and the t-shirt Austin was murdered in. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the chest, piercing the heart and causing almost instant death. This proves, without a doubt, that the defendant's haste and disregard of their surroundings led to the ultimate and untimely death of an unarmed and defenseless man. The defendant caused the death of Austin Winthrop. She chose to aim her gun at his heart and pull the trigger. There is no question that the defendant killed Mr. Winthrop. The defendant said they were trained to shoot to kill when faced with an armed suspect, or in this case, the suspect was not armed and had no cause for harm. The defendant's shot is also the best in the entire squad. We know the defendant intended to kill Mr. Winthrop. There is no question the defendant chose to shoot Mr. Winthrop despite knowing death would be the result of their actions. Austin Winthrop is dead. He was killed by the downstairs neighbor that solely relies on her gun for conflict resolution, despite being trained to de-escalate situations without killing innocent people. The prosecution, unlike the defense, is not trying to justify the brutal killing of Austin Winthrop. Our sympathies go out to the victim's family, friends, and loved ones. This killing was in no way justified, excused, or done under any circumstances that reduce it to a lesser crime. My co-counsel and I will prove this beyond a reasonable doubt and prove that the defendant must be charged with second-degree murder and provide justice for the life of Austin Winthrop that was taken far too soon. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Counsel for the defendant, you can proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm Gabrielle Flowers, and I, along with my co-counsel, Ian Van Riper, are here today to represent defendant Riley Costello. Riley Costello was an officer for the Holly Hills Police Department, was absolutely drained, not physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. He was working his third 14-hour shift of the week. Officer Costello was extremely sleep deprived, relying solely on caffeine and his partner, Charlie Dobbins, to get him through. Dobbins' testimony will confirm that the two spent the night selflessly putting his own life at risk to resolve a string of dangerous crimes. Eventually, Riley's exhausting shift was over. For the first time that night, he could finally take a deep breath. That moment of relief was short-lived. Upon turning on his phone, Riley discovered a load of angry messages from his mother's living facility. Riley Costello felt sick to his stomach while reading his screen. You will hear today how stressful situation distracted him, how the sleep deprivation made him, how he didn't glance up from his phone as he pushed the elevator button. And after his terrible night, all Riley wanted to do was fall asleep in his warm bed. It was then when he opened the door to his apartment that he saw a figure in dark clothing holding what he thought was a gun. Our evidence will show that Riley believed this individual to be a violent burglar. Fearing for his life, an exhausted, emotionally shaken, confused Riley shot the assumed attacker. When he flipped on the lights, Riley discovered with horror that he had made a mistake. And it was not his apartment at all, and he had just ended the life of Austin Winthrop. August 27th, 2020 was a horrible and tragic accident. The defense will be calling 2 witnesses to the stand today. First, you will hear from Mr. Riley Costello himself. Please keep in mind that Riley is not required by law to testify under the Fifth Amendment. However, Riley wants the court to hear his story from himself, even though it is so difficult for him to tell. Today, he will explain the tragic events that unfolded that night on the 27th and his mental state leading up to the incident. And finally, you will hear from Miss Charlie Dobbins. Miss Dobbins is a trained member of the Holly Hill SWAT unit who was first to arrive to the scene of the crime. She will explain how Officer Costello seemed distracted and tired after his shift that night in her interactions with Riley after the incident occurred. Today, 2 charges are being brought against the defendant: second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. In Michigan, second-degree murder is defined as death caused by reckless disregard for human life. Similarly, voluntary manslaughter occurs when one person intentionally kills another but acted while in a strong emotional state. Additionally, the prosecution must prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant did not act in self-defense. In the case, the prosecution carries the burden of proof. This means that they must prove that the defendant was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the charges I have stated. The defense is confident that the prosecution will not be able to meet this feat. Throughout this case, my co-counsel and I will use facts, evidence, and witness testimonies to show that Riley perceived the figure as a dangerous, deadly threat, and that he believed that his actions were immediately necessary. The defense will show how the night of August 27th was indeed a tragic accident. But at the end of this trial, the defense asked for a verdict of not guilty for all charges. Thank you.
Prosecution, at this time, would you like to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call forward Avery Solo to the stand.
Very well, Ms. Solo, you can consider yourself sworn in. Sorry, my apologies. Mr. Solo, you may consider yourself sworn in. Counsel for the prosecution, you may begin direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello, Avery Solo. First, I'd ask, could you please state your name for the court?
Avery Solo.
And could you please spell out your last name?
S-O-L-O.
And could you please identify the defendant?
Certainly. He has dark curly hair. He's wearing headphones and glasses, and he has a red tie.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to start with your background. What are your qualifications?
I'm currently working for the Michigan State Police. Through my work for Michigan State Police, I conduct investigative work, which includes interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence, and sometimes even arranging warrants for arrests. And I've been with MSP for a little over 3 years now. I've been a police officer for a little over 9, with some of that time being with Holly Hills Police Department.
And what is your area of specialty as a lieutenant in the police force?
I specialize in robberies and burglaries that require special attention in the mid-Michigan area. And I'm currently working the night shift.
Thank you. And what type of burglaries require special attention?
The burglaries that require special attention are usually violent in nature. There's some kind of a criminal component to them. that makes them require the special attention.
And what is your education?
I have a dual major in criminal justice and criminology from Michigan State.
And how is your educational background relevant to this case?
Well, criminal justice focuses on the American justice system, and criminology focuses on what motivates someone to commit crimes. And I believe both are kind of pertinent in this case.
Your Honor, I would like to admit Avery Solo as an expert witness in burglaries and robberies that require special attention, as this special attention includes murder with a gun.
Counselor, presumably you mean burglaries and robberies, investigating them, not committing them, correct?
Yes, excuse me, Your Honor.
Is there any response from opposing counsel?
Your Honor, may I voir dire this witness?
Yes, Counselor for the defense, please proceed.
Thank you. Officer Solo, I'm going to be asking just a quick couple of questions. Firstly, what are the stages of collecting fingerprints while on a crime scene?
First, you must dust the area to see whether, to determine where the fingerprints are. You dust that area, and then you place markers on them, and then you identify that as part of the fingerprint process.
Okay, thank you. And what do you use the chemical silver nitrate for in the criminal investigation?
I don't understand how this is relevant whatsoever.
Okay, moving on then. And what role does a mass spectrometer play while conducting a criminal investigation on the crime scene?
I can tell you I've never personally used one.
Okay. Your Honor, based on this witness's incomplete and incorrect answers to my questions, which are well within their field of expertise, I do not believe that they are qualified to be an expert in this case.
Thank you, Counselor, for the defense. At this time, given the detective's background, the court is inclined to enter him in as an expert witness in investigation of burglaries and robberies. However, if there is any lines of questioning about what you talked about, Counselor, silver nitrate, mass spectrometers, then of course, given that there was no expertise demonstrated, well, then you can certainly object to questions along those lines. But at least for now, it seems clear that there's enough background that this witness has that will enter Detective Solo in as an expert witness. Counselor for the prosecution, Ms. Peters, you can proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant Solo, I would now like to focus on August 27th and what occurred. What occurred on August 27th?
Well, at 9:45 p.m., I received a phone call that detailed an officer was involved in the shooting. And the phone call also informed me that it occurred at Starlight Meadows apartment complex. And I'm personally familiar with Starlight Meadows because with my time at Poly Hills Police Department, I know that many of the officers live there. And so I arrived at 9:58 p.m. at the scene at Starlight Meadows at Building 1, Floor 4, apartment number 434.
In what state was the victim in when you entered the scene?
He was found dead, and he was later identified as Austin Winthrop.
And who was there when you arrived at the scene?
Officer Dobbins, who identified himself as the responding officer. He was the first one of the scene. And he identified the shooter as Sergeant Riley Costello. And I was personally surprised to find out that Riley Costello was the shooter because I had known her previously in the force, and he was always such a stickler for the rules. I don't know why.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Response, Ms. Peters.
Your Honor, this is relevant because it is establishing any past relationship and understanding of Sergeant Costello and how that would affect the situation of what occurred on the night of August 27th.
It seems quite relevant at this time, Mr. Van Ripper. We'll overrule the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
What occurred during your interview with the suspect, Sergeant Costello?
He was unusually calm, especially for someone who was just involved in a shooting. I asked him why he didn't follow standard police protocol, which is, for those of you who don't know, in this situation, it would be to, 1, retreat, take cover, and call for backup. And then I also asked him whether he gave Mr. Winthrop a chance to surrender his weapon. And he stated that no, he did not give Mr. Winthrop a chance to surrender his weapon.
And what did you do after you interviewed Costello?
I canvassed the floor of Mr. Winthrop's apartment and then went across the hall to speak to a Miss Emerson Palmer, who was a neighbor of Mr. Winthrop's and knew him well. And she was fully convinced that the shooting was no accident. She knew Miss Costello from a previous incident in which she was yelling at Mr. Winthrop in the hallway for putting up decorations.
Could you please describe the areas throughout the Starlight Meadows apartment complex that you investigated for this case?
Certainly. I canvassed the floor and gathered evidence within Mr. Winthrop's apartment. And I also did the same for Sergeant Costello's apartment.
I would like to bring forth proposed Exhibit 5.
We'll have the bailiff bring it up in just a second.
Lieutenant Solo, do you recognize this proposed exhibit?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
The floor plan that I sketched after canvassing Mr. Winthrop's floor.
Has it changed substantially since you last saw it? Lieutenant Solo, has it changed substantially since you last saw it?
No, it is not.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of Austin Winthrop's apartment layout?
Yes, it is.
Will the court admit proposed Exhibit 5 as Exhibit 5?
Is there any objection from opposing counsel?
No objections, Your Honor.
So noted, entered as Exhibit 5.
Looking at this diagram, how does Mr. Winthrop's apartment compare to Sergeant Costello's?
There are some key differences. Notably, there is a side table that was present in Sergeant Costello's apartment that is not present within Mr. Winthrop's. And then there was a red doormat that was recovered from Mr. Winthrop's apartment that was lodged in the entrance hallway, keeping the door from shutting.
And what did you do when you examined Mr. Winthrop's apartment?
First, I took careful note of the body's position. It was only 1.5 steps away from the couch, lying face down. I recovered the t-shirt for evidence. There was also a game controller that was adjacent to Mr. Winthrop's right hand. The controller was on, and so was the TV across the living room. It was on, it was playing a video game. And the overhead lights of the apartment were also on when I arrived.
And as an expert witness, based upon your investigation, if facing an opponent from the foyer, what possible routes could be used to de-escalate the situation?
Well, in de-escalation training, we focus on preventing these type of confrontations. So for starters, if someone had noticed their apartment door was open or ajar, they could have prevented the conflict to begin with by not even entering the apartment. But once you've entered the apartment and we're in the foyer area and we're facing a shooter, you could retreat and take cover within the kitchen area to the left of the foyer. And you could also retreat back through the door in which you had entered.
I would like to return Exhibit 5, please. Now I'd like to bring forth proposed Exhibit 1. Do you recognize this proposed exhibit? How do you recognize it?
It's a medical autopsy that was created by Patrick A. Fife.
Has it changed substantially since you last saw it? Is it a fair and accurate representation of the autopsy report on Austin Winthrop?
Yes, it is.
Will the court admit proposed Exhibit 1 as Exhibit 1?
Is there a response from opposing counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to object to hearsay. This is an out-of-court document and it falls under no, there is no exception for this document.
Just to clarify, why is it, one more time, why is it hearsay, counselor?
This is an out-of-court statement.
Response from the prosecution counsel?
The autopsy report is admissible under the public records exception because it was made by a public official who, in this case, is Patrick A. Fife. As Patrick A. Fife was acting under his legal duties as a medical examiner when making this autopsy report, this document is considered a public record that was produced by a public office.
Mr. Van Ripper?
Although this was produced by a public office, I believe that it would have to be from someone that is present at the scene, and Patrick A. Fife was not present at the scene.
I don't believe the public records exception to the hearsay rule has any such requirement, Mr. Van Ripper. So we'll overrule the objection and allow in Exhibit 1.
Thank you for the consideration, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. What weapon was the bullet confirmed to be from?
It was shot from a Glock 17, which is the standard issue weapon that Sergeant Costello would have been carrying that evening.
And will you repeat the last two sentences of findings, please?
Of course. Based on the depth of penetration of the bullet, it is estimated that the gun was fired from a distance of 10 to 25 feet from the chest. The face has a 1.2 inch by 0.8 inch red-brown abrasion.
And lastly, will you please read the cause of death?
Caused by gunshot wound to the chest, piercing the heart, and causing almost instant death.
Thank you. I would now like to return Exhibit 1, please. And I would like to bring forth proposed Exhibit 4. Do you recognize this proposed exhibit?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
It was the t-shirt I recovered from Mr. Winthrop's body.
Has it changed substantially since you last saw it? Is it a fair and accurate representation?
Yes, it is.
Will the court admit proposed Exhibit 4 as Exhibit 4?
Any objection from opposing counsel?
No objections, Your Honor.
So noted, entered as Exhibit 4.
What information did you gather from this t-shirt?
Well, there is a bullet hole in the upper left side of the front of the t-shirt, and there's no exit wound. There's also no signs of gunpowder residue on the front of the shirt, which indicates that the shot was fired from quite a distance away.
I would now like to return Exhibit 4, please. I would like to bring forth proposed Exhibit 7. Lieutenant Solo, do you recognize this proposed exhibit?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
It's a red doormat I recovered from Austin Winthrop's apartment.
Has it changed substantially since you last saw it? Is it a fair and accurate representation of the red doormat?
Yes, it is.
Will the court admit proposed Exhibit 7 as Exhibit 7?
Mr. Ben Ripper, any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
So noted, entered as Exhibit 7.
Where did you find this doormat?
It was found wedged in between Austin Winthrop's door, and it was preventing it from shutting.
And what did you do with the doormat?
I took careful note of its position, and I gathered it for evidence.
I would like to return Exhibit 7, please. And I would like to bring forth proposed Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this proposed exhibit?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
It's the gaming controller that I recovered from Mr. Winthrop's body.
And has this gaming controller changed substantially since you last saw it? Is it a fair and accurate representation of Austin Winthrop's gaming controller?
Yes, it is.
Will the court admit proposed Exhibit 3 as Exhibit 3?
Mr. Van Ripper?
No objections, Your Honor.
So noted, entered as Exhibit 3.
Where was this controller located when you collected it for evidence?
Found near the right hand of the victim, and the controller was on when I found it.
And what distinct features are on this controller?
There's some colorful buttons on the right side of the gaming controller, alongside a bright light in the center that shines when the gaming controller is on, as I found it.
I would like to return Exhibit 3, please. Where did you find the gun that Costello said Austin Winthrop had?
Quite interesting, because I canvassed the floor and gathered all the evidence for the apartment, and I never found any sign of a gun or weapon of any kind belonging to Mr. Winthrop.
And what did you do after you investigated Mr. Winthrop's apartment?
I conducted a search of Sergeant Costello's police records.
And what did you find about Sergeant Costello's police record?
I found that she had received extensive training in de-escalating high-risk situations.
And in your expert opinion, what procedures would Sergeant Costello have trained in to de-escalate high-risk situations, like armed robberies?
She would have learned the standard procedure for burglaries and robberies, which is, again, to retreat, take cover, and call for backup.
And based upon your interview with Sergeant Costello, what training did Sergeant Costello apply on August 27th?
To be frank, she didn't. She pointed a gun and shot an unarmed man.
And that is what the defendant did based on your interview? And what is the natural and probable consequence of pointing and shooting a gun at someone?
Proves either the intent to deal great bodily harm or to kill someone.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Van River, would you like to cross-examine Detective Solo?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Solo. I'm going to be asking you just a couple of questions today, and can you please answer them with a yes or no to the best of your ability?
Well, I can, yes.
Okay, thank you. You used to work for the High Hills Police Department with the defendant, correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And is it true that Officer Costello received a promotion instead of you for the SWAT team?
Yes, but there were many officers who were competing for that position. And at the time, she was a young talent. And I believe the department made the right decision in picking her for good marksmanship.
But it was true, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And you were working on the night of August 27th, correct?
Correct.
And you received a call regarding a officer-involved shooting at the Starlight Meadows apartment complex, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And upon arriving at the scene, you spoke to Private Charlie Dobbins, yes?
Yes, I did.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. No, it's okay. And you learned from Officer Dobbins that Austin Winthrop was shot and killed by Mr. Costello, right?
Yes, I learned that.
Okay. And while on the scene, you interviewed Mr. Costello that night, correct?
Right, I did.
Okay. And he told you that he was feeling very exhausted that night, right?
I believe he mentioned it, yes.
Okay. And when interviewing Sergeant Costello, you uncovered that he believed that he was in his own apartment, right?
Yes, he mentioned that.
So that was a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And in fact, Officer Costello told you that from what he believed, that there was a burglar inside his apartment, right?
Yes, that's what he believed at the time. Yes.
That's a yes, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And you knew of a string of burglaries occurring around the time of the incident, right?
I believe I was informed, yes.
Okay. And Costello told you that they had feared for their life upon seeing what they thought was a burglar in their apartment, right?
Yes, they did.
Okay. And while on the scene, you also interviewed Miss Emerson Palmer, a neighbor to the victim, correct?
Correct.
And Emerson saw Riley exit the elevator on their phone, right?
Yes, she did.
And after seeing Riley, Emerson went back to her apartment and said that they did not see anything else that night, right?
Yes, that's what she told me.
Okay. And so just to be clear, Emerson Palmer, the supposed sole witness to this event, did not even see the incident occur?
For what she told me at the time, no. She was just able to tell me what happened before and after the incident.
But she did not see the incident occur, right?
Not from what she told me, no.
Okay. Now, let's move on to the evidence. And you investigated the scene, as you've stated, right?
Correct.
And in the process, you reviewed the rooms of Mr. Winthrop and the defendant, right?
Yes, I did.
And is it true that Mr. Winthrop's apartment is directly above Riley's?
Yes, that is true.
Okay. So they would be around or the exact same distance from the elevator, correct?
Correct. But on separate floors, yes.
But the same distance, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you also noted that the layout of the elevator buttons was unusually arranged, yes?
Yeah, I found it very confusing.
And you also stated that the colors in the paint of the apartments were additionally very similar, right?
They were somewhat similar, yes.
Okay. And you collected the victim's shirt while interviewing the scene, right?
Correct.
Your Honor, let the record reflect I am retrieving Exhibit 4. Do you recognize this, Mr. Solo?
Yes.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the object?
Yes, it is.
Has it changed in any way since you've seen it?
No, it is not.
Okay. Could you just give a quick description of what it is?
Of course, it's the t-shirt I recovered from Mr. Winthrop's body.
Okay, thank you. And in your statement, you stated that the victim's shirt was a dark color, correct?
Correct. But there is a bright red logo on the front of the shirt.
Okay, but in your statement, you said it was a dark color, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. And additionally, the entranceway to the apartment was dark as well, right?
Yes, but the overhead lights were on.
But the entranceway was dark, right?
The entranceway was dark when I arrived, yes.
Okay, let's just stay on topic. And let the record reflect I'm returning proposed Exhibit 4 into evidence. I apologize, Exhibit 4. And Sergeant Stell also stated that Austin appeared to be holding a weapon, right?
Yes, that's what she said.
And upon the investigation, you discovered that this object was a controller, right?
Correct.
And the controller is an elongated shape and a dark color, correct?
Yes, but as I previously stated, the buttons and the bright light in the center would distinguish it from a regular gun.
But you weren't there when the shooting occurred, right?
No, but I saw the gaming controller and I know what a gun looks like, so I believe that's a reasonable assumption.
But since you weren't there when the shooting occurred, you wouldn't know if the lights were on when it happened, right?
I do know if the light was on when I recovered it.
But you don't know if they're on when the shooting occurred, right?
No, I would not be aware of that.
Okay, thank you. The presence of the controller was the reasoning that Sergeant Costello gave as to why they did not follow the proper procedure, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this object that appeared to be holding, well, let me rephrase myself. So Officer Costello has stated that this object, which is the controller, to them appeared to be a gun in the dark, right?
Yes, that's what she believed.
Okay. And according to what Officer Costello said, the presence of this dark shaped object in the individual shirt, as well as just the general darkness, led Officer Costello to perceive them as a burglar, correct?
I don't know what she saw that night.
But this is what they reported to you that they believe.
But based upon her interview, yes, she said she thought the burglar was armed, yes.
Okay, thank you. And you stated that it was reasonable in your initial investigation. Let me rephrase myself. In your initial investigation, you stated that it was reasonable for Officer Costello to perceive Mr. Winthrop as a threat. Is this true or is this not true?
Based upon my initial investigation and like a very preliminary understanding of the case, that was my assumption. But upon a more extensive investigation and once I've gathered my thoughts, I came to the determination that it was not reasonable to determine him as a deadly threat.
But your initial investigation, you did say that it was true, right?
A very preliminary understanding, yes. That was my response.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. Miss Peters, would you like to briefly redirect Detective Solo?
Yes, Your Honor. Lieutenant Solo, what did the defendant say when you asked if she gave Mr. Winthrop a chance to surrender?
No, he did not give Mr. Winthrop a chance to surrender his weapon.
And what did you find in Mr. Winthrop's apartment?
I found the gaming controller adjacent to his right hand. I found, in addition to the red doormat, which was wedged inside the entrance hallway, preventing the door from shutting. And I did not find any presence of a gun or weapon within Mr. Winthrop's apartment.
And again, from what you read in the autopsy report, how far away was Austin when Costello shot him?
About 10 to 25 feet, which agrees with my findings on the gunpowder residue on the t-shirt.
And in your expert opinion, how could the defendant have de-escalated this situation?
You could de-escalate it by simply following standard police procedure for these type of situations, which is, again, to retreat, take cover, call for backup.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, Lieutenant Solo.
Thank you, Counselor. You may step down. At this time, does the prosecution have any additional witnesses to call?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Emerson L. Palmer to the stand. Mrs. Palmer, I'm going to ask you some questions that are sensitive and pertain to the traumatic events that transpired on the night of August 27th. Please do your best to answer them correctly and to the best of your ability, okay?
Okay.
What is your full legal name?
My name is Emerson L. Palmer, and the L stands for Lazarus.
Can you spell your last name for the court?
Palmer.
Could you point out the defendant?
Yes, he is wearing glasses, headphones, and has curly hair.
Okay, let the record reflect the witness has pointed out the defendant. How long have you lived in Starlight Meadows?
I've lived there for about 8 years. I live on the fourth floor, and I live right across from where Austin Winthrop used to live.
Can you tell me about your dog, Humphrey?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled. We'll at least allow a few questions, Counselor. If this really becomes not so relevant, you can renew your objection at that time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll restate my question. Could you please tell me about your dog, Humphrey?
So my dog Humphrey is my golden doodle puppy. I got her about a year ago. My whole life I've struggled with stress and anxiety, and it got pretty unmanageable about a year ago. So I decided to get an emotional support dog. And at the time I knew that Starlight Meadows didn't allow animals, but I did work it out with them because I really did want to stay. I mean, it was close to work. It was within my price range. So thankfully they accommodated me, and I was able to keep Humphrey as my emotional support animal. And I get really stressed out just talking about it. So I didn't really appreciate it when a couple months ago, Riley Costello approached me when I was walking Humphrey and started harassing me about not allowing dogs weren't allowed there. I was breaking the rules. And when people raise their voice to me, I tend to, shut down. It makes me very stressed. And obviously Humphrey did help in this situation, but she can only help so much. So I just kind of shut down, and I wanted to tell her that because I was allowed to, because she was an emotional support animal. But like I said, I just shut down and I just stayed quiet until she left. And that's when me and Humphrey just decided to go get ice cream, just because I was pretty shaken up by the situation.
Thank you for talking about that. I know that was hard.
Thank you.
Can you tell me about the lighting in the Starlight Meadows complex?
So the lights in the hallway are always on, and they are so bright. I have to usually put a towel underneath my door at a crack just so I can fall asleep at night because they are so bright. They shine right through.
And how does the Starlight Meadows complex management handle the tenants?
Through my experience, they handle it really, really well. Like I said, they let me keep Humphrey, and they have just been really accommodating to me. And overall, the management has made it pretty enjoyable to live there.
I'm now going to ask you some tougher questions about the 27th, so just do your best, okay?
Thank you.
Can you walk me through what happened on the night in question?
So on that night, me and Humphrey were just planning on having a chill night in, catching up on some Netflix shows. We decided to order pizza from our favorite place, Michigan and Bumble. So when the delivery person got there, I went to go pay them. And that's when I saw an officer walk off the elevator. At the time, I did recognize her to be Costello, but I didn't know his name at the time. I just did recognize him from our previous interaction. But I paid the delivery person. I tipped her in foreign currency. That's just something I do. But anyway, and I didn't want to have another interaction with Costello just because the last one was so unpleasant and it really made me anxious. So I immediately just went inside. But I was curious on why Costello was on my floor, considering he does not live there. And it looked like it looked like he was going to Austin's apartment. So I did look through the peephole to watch why he was going to Austin's apartment.
Okay. So what did you think when you saw the defendant get off the elevator?
I was confused on why he was there. Like I said, it did look like he was going to Austin's apartment.
Objection, speculation.
Response from the council?
I'm simply asking the witness what she thought when she saw Costello get off the elevator and head towards
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, briefly.
This witness has no knowledge of what Riley Costello was doing that night. Therefore, it is inaccurate for her to say she thought that Riley Costello was going to Austin Winthrop's door, and that would not be to her knowledge. Therefore, she cannot be saying that in court.
Well, Counselor, it clearly was Austin Winthrop's door across the hall from her, correct? The witness does know this. This is correct?
She knows this, but she cannot testify that she thought that he was walking there. She can only testify that she saw him walk up to Riley's door as soon as he got there.
Not sure I understand the distinction, counsel. It seems that she saw the defendant walking up to the door across the hall from her. I'm not sure I'm understanding the distinction we're trying to make. So I'll overrule it for now, counselor.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll restate the question. So what did you think when you saw the defendant get off the elevator?
So as I said earlier, it did look like to me that she was going to Austin's apartment. And so after I shut my door, that's why I decided to look through the peephole, because in my experience, he tends to get angry and yell at people for violating some rules. And I wanted to know if that's why he was on our floor.
Okay. So what did you hear coming from Austin's apartment?
So as I looked at the peephole, I saw Officer Costello just walk in. To me, it did not look like he raised any kind of key card, just walked right in. The door slammed shut behind him, and then I heard some muffled noises like, "Stop, I'm coming in."
Objection, hearsay.
Response, Ms. Macaluso.
This is admissible under the party opponent exception because
Ms. Flowers.
Your Honor, the witness does not know for certain what was said, as the words were not stated directly by her. Therefore, she cannot use this as it's an out-of-court statement. And it is okay for her to say that there was muffled noises, but she cannot say specific words.
But as Ms. Macaluso said, under the party opponent exception to the hearsay rule, if there is an out-of-court statement that was made by an opposing party, in this case the defendant, that could be admissible. So to the extent that Ms. Palmer heard anything that the defendant said, I think I'll overrule the objection. But if it's anything that anybody else said, we'll sustain the objection. So Ms. Palmer, if you heard who you believe to be the defendant say anything, we'll allow you to say that. But anything that anybody else said, we'll sustain the objection. Please don't repeat anything that you believe you heard anyone apart from the defendant say. So sustained in part, overruled in part, counselor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. I'll restate the question. So what did you hear coming from Austin's apartment that the defendant himself said?
So after, like I said, I saw Costello not raise a key card, just walk right into the apartment. The door went slammed shut behind him, and I heard some muffled noises, and it sounded like, "Stop, I'm coming in," and that's when I heard the gunshot.
Objection, speculation.
Speculation because, counselor?
Her response of she does not know for certain what was said, therefore she's inferring what she heard.
But she said this is what it sounded like I heard. So I don't think it's speculation. If she says that's what she heard, it's what she heard. And whether she's certain or not, that's a matter for the jury to decide how certain they think that she heard that. So we'll overrule the objection, counselor.
Okay. What did you do after you heard the gunshot?
So after I heard the gunshot, as much as I didn't want to have to see Officer Costello again, I was concerned for Austin. So I ran out of my apartment, and that's when I saw Costello walking out of the apartment with a gun. And when they opened the door, I could see a body laying on the floor with bleeding out. And I obviously assumed this was Austin since it was his apartment.
How did the officer seem when she came out of Austin's apartment holding a gun?
When he came out, he was really calm. It was honestly concerning and unnerving that he was so calm after he just shot someone in their own apartment.
I'm sorry, I just have a couple more questions for you about the night, okay? Where did you go after the defendant told you to call 911?
Yeah, so after they walked out of the apartment, Costello did tell me to call 911 and say that there was an officer involved in a shooting. And at this point, I went back into my apartment because I was scared. And I looked through the peephole again just so I could still see what was going on. And that's when I saw another officer come up. I don't really know her, but I did recognize her. I think her name is Dobby or something like that. But she approached Costello and they were talking, and honestly, it seemed like he was more, Dobby was more concerned making sure that Costello was okay rather than the person she had just shot. She was so friendly with Costello, just talking, and they acted like nothing ever happened, as if someone wasn't just murdered.
Okay, I'm now going to ask you some questions about the defendant, okay?
Okay.
You remarked that you've seen the defendant before. Tell me about that.
So as I mentioned earlier, we did have an interaction where Costello approached me and essentially harassed me for having Humphrey, but I also did recognize him at another point when they came up to our floor again and were knocking on Austin's door and was yelling about kids running around in ski boots, which I thought was really strange because Austin obviously didn't have any kids. I thought the whole thing was weird, and it seemed like, to me at least, that she was just looking for a reason to yell, kind of like what happened with me and Humphrey.
So you said the defendant was probably just looking for reasons to yell. What did you mean by that?
Well, through my experience with Officer Costello, in my opinion, it just looked like he was very tightly wound and just snapped the smallest things, like seeing a dog or hearing some noise. So that's why it seemed to me to be like that.
And how did the defendant act the last time you saw her when she confronted you about Humphrey?
Well, he was very aggressive and angry, just getting all up in my face, yelling at me.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the Starlight Meadows complex?
The only thing I can think of is that the elevator buttons for building 1 are a little strange. The structure is a little weird. That being said, I mean, most people get it down within the first couple of days or even weeks of living there. I know for me, it was hard to remember where the button was, but after living there for a month, it was muscle memory just to know what button to click. And everyone in the complex knows that they're in a weird order. So just to make sure you press the right one.
Okay. And just one more question for now. How did the defendant appear to you after the killing?
So when I saw them exit Austin's apartment holding a gun, he seemed unnervingly calm. Like I said, he acted like nothing happened, as if he didn't just shoot someone in their own apartment.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor. Thank you, Ms. Palmer.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Flowers, would you like to cross-examine Ms. Palmer?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Palmer. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Could you please answer honestly with a yes or no? Can you do that for me?
If I can answer any yes or no, I will.
Thank you. Now, you are aware of a string of burglaries in the complex, correct?
I had heard about them, but I never actually experienced one.
Thank you. And did this make you feel uneasy?
Kind of, just because the police, it didn't
Thank
seem
you.
like no one was doing anything about them.
And you knew that there was a faulty lock mechanism within the apartment complex, correct?
Yeah, the locks did have to be changed a couple times.
Thank you. Now let's talk about your relationship with Costello. You've had what you say an altercation with Costello, correct?
Yes, I have.
Meaning you did not like Costello?
I wouldn't say that. My experience was negative with them, but I didn't personally know him.
And so that's correct. You could have conflicted feelings with Costello, correct?
I wouldn't say there were conflicting feelings. My experience with them was negative, but that didn't really impact what I saw that night.
Thank you. And you stated in your testimony that you do not trust police officers, correct?
I mean, no, look at all the crime that's been happening.
Thank you. And
Yes, Ms. Macaluso?
Argumentative. I think my witness should be able to finish.
I'll sustain the objection this time. Yeah, Ms. Flowers, it seems that her answers have been fair and relevant to what you're asking so far. Again, if they really are truly just yes or no questions and she goes on for a while, then you can ask for a more direct answer. But the answers she's been giving have been reasonable answers to your questions so far, Miss Flowers. So I'll sustain the objection, the argumentative objection. This.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. My
Um,
apologies if I was being argumentative. And so as I stated, you said in your testimony that you do not trust police officers, correct?
Based on my experience with them, no. I mean, there's been so much crime in the apartment complex and no one's been doing anything. And one just shot my neighbor in their apartment.
And you stated that you would not have moved into the apartment complex if you knew so many police officers lived there.
Objection.
On what grounds, Ms. Macaluso?
Relevance. How does my witness's living situation pertain to the defendant killing Austin Winthrop?
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Of course.
The witness stated this in her testimony, and we are talking about a police officer involved shooting that happened in the apartment complex. And I did ask a prior question that if she trusted police officers. And so I did kind of build up to it a little bit, but also she did state it in her testimony.
So not so relevant whether she stated it in her testimony or not, but it could well be a relevant question. So we'll overrule it and allow one or two more questions. If it doesn't tie back into the case, Ms. Macaluso, you can renew your objection at that time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you like me to repeat the question, Ms. Palmer?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Now, you stated in your testimony that you wouldn't have moved into the apartment complex if you knew so many police officers lived there. Is this true?
Yes, I probably wouldn't have moved in.
Thank you. And now, with your ill feelings towards Mr. Costello, could that mean you were biased against him in this case?
Not in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I'm just testifying on what I saw that night. How I feel did not impact how Costello acted, so I am just testifying on what I saw.
Thank you. Moving on. You watched Costello get off the elevator, correct?
I did, yes.
And you saw the defendant looking at his cell phone?
Yes, he was. It seemed like he was pretty engrossed in it because he did not realize that me and Humphrey were at our apartment door.
Interesting. And you shut your door immediately and watched through your peephole, right?
Yes, I was stressed and anxious about having another altercation, so I did go inside my apartment.
And you watched the defendant walk towards what you thought was Mr. Winthrop's door?
I mean, I know that it was Mr. Winthrop's door. He is my neighbor.
Mm-hmm. And you were eating pizza while you watched through your peephole, correct?
Yes, I had just ordered some pizza.
Could that mean your vision was skewed because you were not fully attentive through the peephole watching what you thought you saw was Mr. Riley Costello?
No, my eye was at the peephole and my mouth was below it. I don't watch when I eat, so I was looking through the peephole as I was eating. I can do both without really obscuring my vision at all.
And a peephole is a very small, narrow space to look through, right?
It is, but when you see out, it's an almost a fisheye lens, so you can see more when you look through it.
Interesting. And you thought the door was unlocked, correct?
Yes, I did not see Costello raise any key cards, so to me it did look like it was unlocked.
And which could possibly mean somebody broke in.
I mean, I guess it could, but it also could just mean that the locks were acting up again.
Mm-hmm. Now, when Costello entered the apartment, was it dark?
The room was dark, but the lights in the hallway are so bright that it shined inside.
Thank you. And you watched the door close completely, correct?
Yes, the door slammed shut behind Costello.
And you say in your testimony that you saw Austin's lights turn on, correct?
Yes, after I heard the loud noise that was a gunshot, the lights did turn on.
And how did you see this through your peephole and through the door?
I could see the light coming in underneath the door since there is a small crack, so I could see the light shining through.
Mm-hmm. And how, after the loud bang, you entered the hallway to approach Austin's door, right?
Yes, I was very nervous for him. I wanted to know what had happened, so I did open my door and go into the hallway, but that's when Austin's door opened and Costello came out holding a gun. And
Costello told you to call 911, correct?
Yes, he did.
And you let Officer Dobbins back into the apartment, correct?
Yes, later they asked to be let in since the door was locked.
And you saw Costello sit on the ground outside of the apartment, right?
I saw them talk to Dobby. Yes, I did.
And just to clarify, you didn't see what happened inside of Austin's apartment on the night of the 27th, did you?
Well, no, the door was closed. The only person who saw it was Riley and Austin.
So, Miss Palmer, you really didn't know for certain what happens that night, did you?
Well, I mean, I saw what happened before and after, but I didn't see what happened as Riley shot and murdered Austin, no.
Thank you, Miss Palmer. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. Ms. Macaluso, would you like to briefly redirect Ms. Palmer?
Yes, Your Honor. I just have a few more questions for you, okay, Ms. Palmer? What has been done to help all the crime in the complex?
Sadly, very little. I mean, nothing's been done. I mean, with so many cops living there, I would think that they would be very on it and almost eager to stop this crime happening in because a lot of them, they live there. But sadly, nothing's been done. And I can only think that if something had been done sooner, maybe Austin would still be with us today.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Ms. Palmer, you may step down. At this time, does the prosecution have any additional witnesses to call?
No further witnesses, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. So this concludes the prosecution's case in chief. As a time check, again, both sides did ask for aggregated time. Each side has 40 minutes in total for their witnesses. The prosecution, for the remaining witnesses called by the defense, you have a little over 11 minutes. And the defense, for your witnesses when you call them, you have about 25 minutes remaining. Clear on both sides?
Yes, Your Honor.
Perfect. Counsel for the defense, you can call your first witness.
Your Honor, if I may I request a theoretical directed verdict on the grounds that the prosecution failed to prove all the elements of Lovett. Specifically today, they failed to prove the location that the crime occurred in. The crime occurred in the county of Ingham, and this was never identified.
Understood. Thank you, counsel. We'll assume that it was proved indirectly, though. Quite clearly on both sides, we've established the apartment complex, the town location, which is indeed in that county. So we'll deny the motion for a directed verdict at that time, Counselor, but well argued.
Thank you for the consideration, Your Honor.
You can proceed with calling your first witness.
Your Honor, at this time, we would like to call Officer Riley Casella to the stand.
Officer Costello, before Mr. Van Ripper proceeds with direct examination, I just want to confirm that you do know that under the Fifth Amendment, you do have a right to not testify here at trial. Do you understand that, Officer Costello?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you are knowingly waiving your Fifth Amendment right to not testify to speak here today, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. Thank you very much, Officer Costello. Mr. Van Ripper, you can proceed with direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Officer Costello. Can you please state your name, spelling the last for the court?
Of course. Riley Costello, Costello.
Okay. And how old are you, Officer Costello?
I'm 28 years old.
And what is it that you do for a living?
Well, as of recently, I've been in the SWAT unit in the Holly Hills Police Department.
And how long have you been doing this?
SWAT specifically about a year, but I've been in the law for quite some time now.
Okay. And what kind of education have you received as an officer and to obtain this current position?
Well, I went to Michigan State and I received my 4-year in criminology. And then on top of that, upon getting in the police academy, they had me do some various training for a couple of months to get in my position. And then being on the SWAT, they gave me some additional training even then.
And what kind of behavior was expected while you were on the job?
Just a lot of respect. I mean, you're expected to follow the rules, and you expect the same from society, so you have to do it.
And have you accomplished anything notable in your career or anything worth mentioning today?
I'd like to think so. I am the youngest in the SWAT unit for Helly Hills in their history, and I've received a couple awards in my time, and you often get a lot of high remarks. So I'd like to say so.
Okay. And where do you live, Officer Costello?
I live in the Starlight Meadows apartment complex.
How long have you lived there?
I joined when I joined the police force, so about 5 years ago.
And if you could just give a brief description of maybe what the environment was like.
To be completely honest, up until recently, it was a very nice apartment complex. I mean, they had even free ice cream on Tuesdays. That was pretty cool. A lot of the people there are really nice, but recently there have been some robberies, which is quite alarming. I mean, it's pretty scary to think that your safety is at risk at any given moment.
And how long have those been going on?
The robberies have been going on for a little over a year now, and the problem doesn't seem to be getting any better. If anything, it seems to be getting worse.
Okay. So how safe do you feel at the apartment complex?
I'm honestly like kind of afraid being there sometimes. I mean, like I said, like it was really nice, and then all of a sudden, just it seems to be coming out of nowhere, and just I don't know. It's really, really alarming.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. And if you could you describe the third floor of the apartment complex? Just brief.
Yeah, I live on the third floor, and the third floor is pretty much the same exactly as the rest of them. I mean, you give or take the lobby, every single floor is pretty much exactly the same. I mean, the wallpaper, and there's a bulletin board on each floor that stays in the same spot, and the numbers are relatively the same.
Okay, so what is the fourth floor in relation to the third?
The fourth floor is right above, and it's again just exactly the same as the third and the rest of them.
Okay. And could you describe the layout of your room briefly?
Yeah, funny enough, just like the layout of the apartment, all of the rooms are exactly the same too. There isn't really a whole lot of leeway on what you can do with the apartment. You're pretty much just allowed to move the furniture, and that's about the extent of what you're allowed to do.
Speaking of the apartment complex, could you give a quick description of what your neighbors were like?
I had some pretty good friends in the Starlight Meadows apartment complex. I had all throughout the apartment building. There were some very nice people in there. There was a couple of people which did have a little bit of the like rule disobeying kind of tendency, which was a little bit irritating at times, I admit, but I got over it.
And who was Austin Winthrop?
Austin was my upstairs neighbor. I liked him. I really did. I mean, he was just such a nice guy. I mean, we had a common interest in Deadpool. We like to talk about that a lot. I mean, I wasn't like the best of friends with the guy or anything, but he was very nice. And the one thing that he did have a little bit of disdain for the rules, which was kind of just the funny thing about Austin. Everyone knew that about him. And at times, though, it did cause me some lack of sleep and such.
And what were you doing, or what was your work schedule like on the week of the 27th?
God, it was insanely busy. I mean, we had a couple of new guys quit in the beginning of the week, and it just brought a lot of problems to us. I mean, me and my coworker Dobbins were given multiple 14-hour shifts in a row, and I believe on the 27th was the third one in a row, and man, we were just ready to go home.
Okay. And what were you doing on August 27th prior to the incident?
Well, I was working, and then when I got off eventually, I finally got to check my phone. And my mother was put into a nursing home recently, and it's just kind of, it worries me a little. I don't get to really know what's going on with her during the day, so I spend a lot of my time after work checking on her. And she seemed to honestly not be doing very well anymore. I mean, the nursing home didn't have anything good to say. And I started walking home to the apartment and just kind of did the best as I could to walk and text.
Okay. So after your workday, you were heading to the apartment?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you have any plans previously?
Oh, me and Dobbins had a plan to watch the baseball game. The Tigers were playing. We're big fans, but I mean, I think we were both agreed at that point that I don't even think we could stay awake.
could you describe what had happened after you'd entered the apartment complex?
Well, I separated from Charlie. He left, and I took the elevator. And I went upstairs to, well, that was my apartment. Excuse me. Here you go. Sorry. I walked to my apartment, and I went to unlock it, and I opened it up, and there was a man inside, and I was scared for my life. I mean, I had heard about the robberies, and I thought I'd just be lucky. I thought it never happened to me, and I don't know. I just thought I was in danger. It was just a terrible thing.
And what had happened after you saw the man?
Well, I walked in and started pointing something at me, and I said, "Stop, police!" And he didn't identify himself, and he just moved closer and closer. And when I told him to stop again, he just kept pointing a thing at me. And I mean, all I knew what to do in this, I just had to act to save myself. That's all I could do. I couldn't take cover. I couldn't do anything. I mean, I just had to do what was best. That's what the police force told me to do, and I had to take lethal action. I killed him, man.
And why did you not retreat from the situation?
I mean, I couldn't. I mean, the door had shut. If I turned around and tried to open it, I'd be vulnerable. I could be shot right then and there, and there would have been a robber on the loose and a murderer at the loose at that point. And I couldn't go in the kitchen. I mean, I would have been locked in a corner, and I mean, my life would have just been in danger no matter what.
What had happened after you'd taken lethal action, Officer Costello?
Well, I turned on the light and I walked over to the body, and after checking his pulse, he was gone, and it was Austin, my neighbor upstairs, and he was gone, and it was my fault.
And what had happened after you'd confirmed his death?
I left the scene alone. I walked to the hallway, and Miss Palmer, his neighbor, was outside, and she asked what had happened, and I just told her to just call the police, and I just sat down and broke down in the corner and waited for the cops to show up.
How are you currently dealing with the situation, Officer Costello?
It's been a nightmare. I mean, I had to start seeking help, and just I don't know. Yeah, it's just the police academy. They can't prepare you for that. No one can prepare you for that. I mean, you take a man's life, and you just have to live with that, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I mean, it's just on your conscience for the rest of your life, and there's nothing you can do. And I just had to live with the fact that I did something so terrible.
Thank you for your testimony, Officer Costello. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Ms. Peters, would you like to cross-examine Officer Costello?
Yes, Your Honor. Hello, Sergeant Costello. I'm going to ask you a series of yes or no questions. I ask that you answer them to the best of your ability, okay?
I'll do my best.
First, I'd like to talk about your experiences in Starlight Meadows. In your time at Starlight Meadows, there have been numerous cases of petty theft, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But there have been no violent incidents.
That I'm aware of, not necessarily, no.
And you filed 24 complaints against Starlight Meadows tenants?
Your Honor, relevance.
Ms. Peters?
Your Honor, I'm establishing any previous history with other tenants and possible witnesses in this case.
Overruled. We'll allow the line of questioning, counsel.
Thank you for consideration.
You filed 24 complaints against Starlight Meadows tenants?
The number sounds about right.
And you've called them problem tenants?
Mm-hmm.
And you've called these tenants wicked violators as well?
Yeah, they do violate the rules.
You only decided to confront Mr. Winthrop about the noise after a year or two, correct?
Yes.
So you spent over a year being irritated by noise before confronting Mr. Winthrop?
And the noise problem started happening eventually. I mean, I was better at sleeping at the time, I suppose, but it really started annoying me recently.
So, but it's been over a year, correct?
Yes.
Before this confrontation, you woke up from noise at 5:30, correct?
Yes.
And you were tired?
Well, at 5:30 in the morning, I'm a little tired, yeah.
And you thought it sounded like children were running around in ski boots?
It did sound like that.
I would now like to move to the night of August 27th, Sergeant Costello. Did you take the elevator up to Mr. Winthrop's apartment?
Yes, I did.
And upon coming to the door, that's when you notice a red doormat?
It wasn't there.
And you told him the red doormat was not there?
It was not there the night.
Sergeant Costello, to clarify, I'm referring to the morning at 5:30 when you came to Mr. Winthrop's apartment to confront him about the noise.
My mistake. I thought you were referring to the 27th, but yes, the doormat was there.
Thank you. And you told him he needed to move his obnoxious red doormat indoors.
Yeah, it was a tripping hazard. I mean, it could have caused someone to fall and break their nose if they were really unlucky.
I apologize for the confusion, Sergeant Costello. I would now like to move to the night of the shooting with you. When you came home on August 27th, you still had your department issued gun?
Yes.
And you don't leave your gun at the Holly Hills Police Department when you're off duty?
No, we're able to take it home.
And when you came home, did you use the elevator?
Yes.
Did you press button 4?
I meant to press 3
But did you press button 4?
by mistake. Yes.
So you intentionally went up to Mr. Winthrop's floor?
No, I mean, I really meant to hit 3.
But you just stated that you pressed button 4, which takes you to Mr. Winthrop's floor.
Yes, by pure mistake.
Did you see a doormat when you came to Mr. Winthrop's apartment?
No.
And according to testimony from Lieutenant Solo, there was a red doormat in Austin Winthrop's doorway. Did you see this doormat?
No, the doormat was not there. I don't know. I guess he moved it.
Was it dark in the apartment?
Very.
But the TV was on.
It was on, but it wasn't very bright.
And did you see anything?
Meaning,
Did you see something in the shadows?
there was a man pointing. It was a man pointing a gun at me. I mean,
And did
Yeah.
your mind jump to the past occurrences of small petty theft at Starlight Meadows over the years?
honestly, at that moment, I didn't know what was happening. All I knew was there was a man pointing a gun at my head, and I thought I was going to die.
And you put your hand on your gun upon realizing this.
Yes.
But now you know that's when you saw the gun, correct?
He was. Yeah.
But you now know it's a gaming controller.
At the time of the scene, it really looked like a weapon.
Did you turn your head to the door upon hearing it slam shut?
I can't recall if I did or not.
And that's when you saw a dark object in Mr. Winthrop's hand?
Yeah, he was. Well, yeah.
And upon viewing the controller you assumed was a gun, you decided to go for the lethal shot?
I went for the lethal shot after saying him to stop, and at that point, I was expecting someone to identify themselves, but the man kept moving closer to me and closer to me. And he was pointing at something at me, and he wouldn't identify himself, so that's when I decided to take it.
And did you give Mr. Winthrop a chance to surrender?
I gave him I told him to stop twice, and he didn't.
But according to Lieutenant Solo's testimony, you told him that, no, I did not give him, Mr. Winthrop, a chance to surrender, correct?
I told him to stop twice. I'm not really sure what Mr. Solo said.
But this is what Lieutenant Solo testified that you said.
I'm not entirely
Objection,
sure.
Your Honor. Hearsay.
Response, Ms. Peters?
Your Honor, this statement was given by by Sergeant Costello himself, who I am in questioning currently.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. Van River?
Although this wasn't previously a statement given by Officer Costello, they're asking them to describe what Avery Solo heard Officer Costello say. So I believe in that sense it would be hearsay because it's asking for Officer Solo's opinion and what they heard.
Sustained. Yes, Miss Peters, you can only ask Officer Costello what he had heard at the scene or what he himself had said, not anything that Mr. Solo or Detective Solo had said at the scene. So we'll sustain it as to that, Counselor.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. You have the best marksmanship in your squad, correct?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Well, Counselor, I believe you brought this up on direct examination of your client, so we'll allow the line of questioning.
You read the question, please.
Yes, you have the best marksmanship in your squad, correct?
Yes.
And you could have only wounded him if you wanted to, correct?
Yeah, in this situation, that was not appropriate, but yes, I could have.
So you chose lethal force over wounding him.
Well, in this situation, I mean, my life was at stake, and I mean, I had to do it. I couldn't.
And only after killing Mr. Winthrop did you realize it was not your apartment, correct?
Yeah, I turned the lights on, and that Austin was on the ground, and yeah, that's what I noticed.
And you looked for your phone before checking his pulse, correct?
I honestly don't recall.
And you couldn't find your phone, correct?
No, I cannot.
And you went to leave the apartment, and that's when you saw Emerson Palmer.
Yes.
And then you went back inside the apartment,
Yes.
and then you checked Mr. Winthrop's pulse.
I turned the light on, and I saw it was him, and I went out of the hallway, and then I had to make sure he was passed away.
So that is when you checked Mr. Winthrop's pulse.
Yeah.
So you went to leave the apartment before checking Mr. Winthrop's pulse.
Well, I mean, I already knew it was him. That's why I was going to tell someone to call the police before anything.
And that's when you left the apartment, correct?
After I checked his pulse?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because it was now considered a crime scene?
Yes.
Because of the crime you committed?
Yes.
You know standard police procedure for a burglar in a residence is to retreat, take cover, and call for backup.
In this situation, that was not an option. So when they can't apply, you do have to improvise.
Correct.
I'm sorry, what was that?
But you know the standard police procedure, correct?
Of course.
But you didn't use this procedure.
Proper procedure changes when some of the things can apply. And this night, I mean, I had no option to do any of these things. I couldn't retreat. I mean, the door was closed, and I honestly thought I was going to die.
Would you consider yourself a skilled police officer?
I think so.
But despite your extensive training and phenomenal skills as an officer, Mr. Winthrop ended up dead on the floor of his own apartment.
I did not know that.
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Overruled. I think this is quite a critical point of the case. We'll allow a few more questions, Counselor.
Thank you for the consideration.
Could you please restate?
But despite your extensive training and phenomenal skills as an officer, Mr. Winthrop ended up dead on the floor of his own apartment.
I didn't know it was Mr. Winthrop, but unfortunately, that's what happened.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, Sergeant Costello.
Thank you, Counselor. Mr. Van Ripper, would you like to briefly redirect your client?
Yes, Your Honor. Officer Costello, I just have a couple of questions to reiterate. Firstly, why did you not retreat from the scene?
I had no option to. I mean, at that point, the door is closed, and if I turn around, my back is exposed to an armed shooter, and any other option was just not. I couldn't go forward. I mean, and I couldn't go in the kitchen, and honestly, I just had nothing to do.
And why did you leave the scene after you could not find your phone?
I needed someone to call the police. I mean, if Austin could have been saved, he could have been saved, and I had no time to waste.
And why, after re-entering the room, did you leave once again and lock the door?
Well, as a police officer, you can't tamper with the crime scene, and it would have been really irresponsible if I would have stayed in the room. I had to just wait.
Okay. And what happened or let me rephrase myself. Let's just go back a little bit. What had happened once you went to walk up and enter Mr. Winthrop's room?
I opened the door. I'm sorry. Did you say before?
Yep, as you were entering the room.
Oh, I was on my phone. I mean, I don't get to use my phone on the job, and my mom's in some critical condition, and I really just had to give her my full attention.
Did you not see anything indicating that it was your apartment?
No.
And how would you describe the general layout of the apartment complex just one more time?
Every floor and every room is exactly the same, with the exception of the lobby downstairs.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counsel. Officer Costello, you may step down. At this time, does the defense have an additional witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor, we would like to call Ms. Charlie Dobbins to the stand.
Thank you. And Ms. Flowers, counsel for both sides, before you begin, just as a time check for the final witness, defense for direct and redirect, you have just over 14 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
And prosecution, this will be a short cross-examination. You have under 2 minutes for cross-exam. You can proceed with the direct exam.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Miss Dobbins. Can you please state your name, spelling the last for the court?
Good evening. My name is Charlie Dobbins, Dobbins.
And how old are you, Miss Dobbins?
I'm 35 years old.
And where do you live?
I live in the Starlight Meadows apartment complex on the 6th floor.
And what was it like living there?
Honestly, living at Starlight Meadows was great at first. I get to live next to all of the police officers that work on the Holly Hills Police Department. So that's really nice to have friends living right next to me. However, after living in Starlight Meadows for a while, I started noticing some bad things about the apartment complex. First off, the locking mechanisms in the apartment system are very faulty. I cannot tell you how many times I've left my apartment, locked my door, and went to work, only to come back home and realize that my door had been unlocked the entire time. This made me and my fellow residents feel really paranoid and unsafe within our own homes. And not only that, but there had been a string of burglaries occurring in the apartment complex just months leading up to the incident. And this, coupled with the locking mechanism faulty system, it made everyone really nervous and scared. I was afraid that I would be the next victim of attack.
I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Dobbins. What is your occupation currently?
Currently, I'm a private with the Holly Hills Police Department SWAT unit.
And how long have you been a part of the SWAT unit?
Just over a year now.
What types of crime does the SWAT unit usually handle?
On the SWAT unit, we usually handle a lot of high intensity, risky crime, such as hostage situations. But before every incident, we are briefed. We know what's going to happen. Once we go in, we know the situation. We already have in our minds our plan of procedure and everything going into it.
And who are you partnered with on the SWAT unit?
I've been partnered with Sergeant Riley Costello since starting my time on the SWAT unit about a year ago.
And what was it like working with Mr. Costello?
It was honestly great. At first, I was kind of intimidated by Riley. I mean, he has a great reputation around the SWAT unit for being an excellent marksman and a stickler for rules. So I was a little scared of him just because I'm a newbie. But once we started working together, I came to find out that he was a great, nice person. He always gave me advice, helped me out in any way he could, and we became great friends because of that.
And typically, how many hours a week did you two work?
So in the months leading up to the incident, we had a couple people quit on the SWAT unit. So that led me and Sergeant Riley Costello to take on a lot of hours. Around that time, we were working 50 to 60 hours a week, or in layman's terms, a lot.
What was it like working these long hours?
It was really hard. Don't get me wrong, I loved my job on the SWAT unit. I wouldn't trade it for the world. But when I'm working 50 to 60 hour weeks, it's really stressful. Dealing with that crime on a daily basis is really hard and mentally taxing. Not to mention
Objection, relevance.
Ms. Flowers, counselor.
I'm just trying to. Sorry, that was I'm just trying to establish the defendant along with Miss Davis's stressful job and what they did for a living.
Seems quite reasonable for me. We'll allow it. Overruled, Ms. Macaluso.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry about the technical issue. Now, Ms. Dobbins, going back to the night of the incident, what day was that?
It was August 27th, 2020.
And what was your workload like that day?
On that night, I had just gotten off my third 14-hour shifts of the week with Riley. We were both so exhausted and tired.
And did you two have plans that night?
Yes, we did. Initially, we had planned to get together after work and watch the Tigers game together. But after our shift, we both realized that we were just completely exhausted. We both just wanted to go to our apartments and go to bed. So we decided to cancel plans.
And how did Sergeant Costello seem to you when you arrived back at the apartment complex, to your knowledge?
Sergeant Costello seemed really unusual that night. He had been getting a lot of news lately about his mother and her assisted living facility. And I know that has been really hard for him. He had relayed that knowledge to me, and I felt horrible for him. I know that night was especially stressful for him with the living situation. And besides that, we were completely exhausted. Like I said, when we walked back home to the apartments, we didn't even talk, which was really unusual.
Now, what happened after you two departed from each other?
So when we got to the apartment complex, I went to go get my mail like I usually do. And I said goodnight to Riley. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and there was just pure sadness in his eyes. He went towards the elevators after that.
And was it usual for Riley to take the elevator?
No, it was not usual at all for Riley to take the elevator, which is why I was a little confused when he took them. Really, he only took the elevators when he was extremely exhausted after work. He usually took the stairs because he's always an overachiever trying to stay in shape for work. So that night I knew he was completely exhausted because he wouldn't have taken the elevator other than that.
At this time, I'd like to retrieve evidence 6. Now, Ms. Dobbins, can you please explain what this is?
Yes, this is the elevator button layout of the Starlight apartment complex elevator.
And are you very familiar with this?
Yes, I am. Unlike Riley, I usually take the elevator daily.
And can you describe the layout of the buttons to me?
Yes, so it's very unusual. It is very, I mean, if you just look at it, it looks very odd. You can see on the bottom it goes P3, P2, P1, and when you look at it up and down, it goes 943, P3, 852, P2, which is very odd. I've never seen an elevator button sketch laid out like this. Also, it's arranged in a snaking fashion, which is very unusual for elevator buttons.
In the United States, is it common to read from right to left, not left to right?
Foundation, I don't think this exhibit has been admitted yet.
Sustained.
Thank you. Would you like me to repeat the question, Ms. Dobbins?
Yes.
Now,
yes.
in the United States, is it typical to read right to
Your Honor.
Correct, sustained. So before moving any further into the exhibit, Ms. Flowers, it's only a proposed exhibit at this time. It has not been entered into evidence yet. It has not been used by any other attorneys in the case.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I thought it was. Going back, Ms. Palmer, is this a fair and accurate representation of the elevator buttons?
It is indeed a fair and accurate representation, yes.
And has it changed since the last time you saw it?
It is not at all.
And at this time, I would like to enter Exhibit 6 into evidence.
Any objection, Ms. Macaluso?
Yes, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge, as this is a sketch drawn by Detective Solo. The defendant would never have seen it.
The sketch, perhaps, but based on what on the questions that Ms. Flowers had asked the witness, they said it was a fair and accurate representation of the elevator buttons that, as she said, she used every day. So though she may not have seen the sketch, it's an accurate representation of what she had seen before in real life. So we'll overrule the objection and allow it to be entered into evidence, Counselor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Moving on, Ms. Stabbins. Now, is it odd that these buttons read left to right, not right to left?
Yes, it is odd. We're in the United States. We read left to right. So it's very odd that it goes the opposite way. Also with the snaking fashion, it's very strange. In the past, when I rode on the elevator with my fellow officers who also live in the apartment complex, we've often accidentally hit the wrong button and went to the wrong floor. Usually we'd laugh it off, but it gets really irritating once that happens a couple times. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Stabbins. I'd like to let the record reflect I'm returning Exhibit 6 to evidence. Moving on. What made you aware of the incident that night?
So once I got into my floor, I was just about to go to my apartment, but then I got a call from dispatch telling me that there was an officer involved shooting on the 4th floor. So I ran down the stairs right away to go investigate the scene.
And what did you find upon arriving to the scene?
I'm sorry, this is really hard for me to talk about. Once arriving on the scene, I saw my partner, Sergeant Riley Costello, sitting outside the apartment complex. He handed me a gun and he kept pointing towards an apartment door right next to him. He was rocking back and forth, crying, and I kept asking him, what happened? What happened? And he couldn't get the words out. He was so incredibly emotionally shaken. I'd never seen him like that before. So I got a neighbor to let me into the apartment.
What did you find once you went into the apartment?
After I had the neighbor let me in. Sorry. I saw the worst thing I'd ever seen in all my years as a police officer. I saw the body of Austin Winthrop on the floor. I ran over to him right away and checked his pulse. I mean, this was a guy that me and Riley knew, that we spoke to, that we were friendly with. He was dead.
What did you do next, Ms. Dobbins?
After I confirmed that Austin was dead, I didn't touch anything on the scene because I knew that I needed to preserve it for the Michigan State Police. I walked out of the apartment and I locked the door to preserve the scene.
And who was Emerson Palmer?
Emerson Palmer was the neighbor to Austin Winthrop. She was also there on the scene and I spoke to her. It's kind of odd. Emerson is known as a compulsive liar throughout the apartment complex, a real attention seeker. You always know when she's lying because she says the word a lot. Let's just say she was saying it a lot that night.
And who else did you speak to that night while assessing the situation?
After speaking to Emerson, I spoke to Mr. Avery Solo, the officer conducting the investigation. And then I went over to Riley. I spoke to him. And I told him it was going to be okay. Everything was going to be okay. And he was just so emotionally shaken and crying. I just wanted to try to comfort him. I knew it was a horrible accident.
And what was his demeanor after the incident?
like I said, he was as emotionally shaken as I'd ever seen him. He was rocking back and forth. He could barely get words out to explain what had just happened. Typical of many accidental cases I've seen before.
Thank you, Ms. Dobbins. No further questionings, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. And that is within 5 seconds your time. So that's no time left for redirect on the defense side.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Prosecution, would you like to cross-examine the witness? There's, I think, just under 2 minutes.
Yes, Your Honor. For the sake of time, can the witness be limited to only yes or no answers?
Depends on whether you ask yes or no questions, Counselor.
Understood. You and the defendant are very close friends and partners, correct?
I don't know if I'd say very close. We've hung out a couple times.
Please, yes or no, Ms. Dobbins.
I wouldn't say very close, but I'd say friendly.
Friends and partners, yes.
Yes.
Okay. On the night of the 27th, did you investigate once you're on the 4th floor?
Yes, once I the
Okay,
call.
thank you. When you saw the victim, did he have a pulse?
After I went to check, he didn't have a pulse.
Okay, so the defendant had killed him?
That is, I didn't know what happened at the time because Riley couldn't even get words out.
The defendant and yourself are trained to de-escalate tense situations, correct?
Yes, in the SWAT
And
unit.
taught the correct protocol for an intruder in a residence?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that last question.
And taught the correct protocol for an intruder in a residence?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Were you taught the correct protocol for an intruder in a residence?
We were taught, for the SWAT unit, we're taught when we go in.
Okay, the correct protocol is to take cover, retreat, and call for backup. Would you agree?
In certain situations, but not this one.
Do you know if the defendant took cover?
Objection, lack of personal knowledge.
Overruled. We'll let the witness know whether, or we'll let the witness answer whether she knows this or not.
Thank you. Do you know if the defendant took cover?
I wasn't there, so
Okay. Do you know if the defendant retreated?
To my knowledge, she couldn't. But
Okay,
I wasn't there.
but you don't know. You weren't there.
Objection, argumentative.
I just,
We'll let the counsel finish.
thank you. So you would say you're pretty uninformed when it comes to what actions really transpired on the 27th, correct?
I wouldn't say that at all.
You don't know what the defendant did and you don't know the details of the case.
Once I calmed Riley down and after the situation occurred, I started getting information from her. I started getting.
But your objective knowledge of the case begins and ends with your brief surveillance of the scene, correct?
My knowledge of the case when I arrived on the scene was that a shooting had occurred. I don't know what happened there. I was not there, but
So
it
you
looked
would
like an
say,
accident to me.
so you would say the information of the case that you know objectively, that you saw with your own eyes and weren't told by the defendant is brief, correct?
I'm kind of confused. Can you repeat the question, please?
The information you know that wasn't told to you by the defendant is very limited, correct? Just or yes or no would do, Ms. Dobbins.
When I got to the scene, the information I received was limited, but after the fact, I received a broader a form of information on the case. I got witness testimony from the neighbor. I got
Received witness testimony?
One last question, Ms. Macaluso.
Okay,
Yes,
just,
I talked to Riley and I got her view on the scene, or his view on the scene, as well as the neighbor's view on the scene. So yes, I talked to them extensively after.
okay. So in your very brief surveillance of the scene, you were only in there for 30 seconds. You didn't see much, correct?
I wasn't in there for only 30 seconds. I was in there to see if the victim was alive or not. And when I talked to Riley, he said he thought it was a burglar. Why would he not? He was wearing black. There was something that looked like a gun sitting next to him. Minimal light.
The gun was sitting next to him?
That's time, counsel. Thank you. No further questions, I believe, from I think both sides have ran out of time. So Officer Dobbins, you may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
At this time, I believe that is time for both the witness portions of the trial for the prosecution and the defense. So we'll move into closing statements. Closing statements for the prosecution. Ms. Peters, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good day. As previously stated by my co-counsel Zoe Macaluso, my name is Paige Peters. We are representing the state of Michigan on the indictment of Riley Costello for second-degree murder. The case the defense has brought before you today is insufficient in both evidence and reasoning to protect the defendant. The defendant, Riley Costello, swore an oath to uphold the Constitution when he became a police officer. He was then given a badge, a symbol of his oath of compassion, honor, and authority that he would protect the citizens. That badge that the defendant wore over his heart represents the preservation of life. On August 27th, the defendant broke the promise he had made when he put on that badge. He killed an innocent man in his own apartment, and in doing so, he regarded the compassion, honor, authority, and preservation of life that he promised to uphold. On August 27th, 2020, at Building 1 and apartment number 434 at Starlight Meadows apartment complex in Huron County, Michigan, the defendant, in a coldly calculated decision, chose to fire his gun at Mr. Winthrop with intent to kill, committing second-degree murder. The first element of second-degree murder states that the defendant caused the death of Austin Winthrop. That is, Austin Winthrop died as a result of being shot with a gun. The defendant has admitted himself that he killed Austin. The autopsy report of Mr. Winthrop found that he died as a result of a gunshot wound to the chest, piercing the heart and causing almost instant death. Also, Lieutenant Avery Solo testified that the defendant not only killed Austin, but that the defendant didn't even give Austin a chance to surrender. The second element of second-degree murder states that the defendant intended to kill or do great bodily harm. Lieutenant Avery Solo testified that the natural and probable cause of pointing and shooting a gun at someone, as the defendant did, indicates an intent to kill or do great bodily harm. The defendant also testified himself that he intentionally administered a lethal shot to Austin. The third element of second-degree murder states that the death of Mr. Winthrop was not justified. The defendant did not have the right to choose the most lethal form of protection when he knew of other ways to defend himself in that situation. As Lieutenant Solo has testified, the defendant has had years of experience on how to handle and de-escalate these types of situations. The defendant has terrific marksmanship, the best in his squad. The defendant could have shot Mr. Winthrop's right arm, the one that was supposedly holding a gun, to effectively disarm him. The defendant could have followed standard procedure to retreat, take cover, and call for backup. As Lieutenant Solo testified, the defendant could have taken cover in the kitchen or out the apartment door, but he didn't do these things. He chose to kill, all on the basis that Mr. Winthrop was walking, not running or charging towards him. The floor plan of apartment 434 found that when Mr. Winthrop was shot, he was only 1.5 steps away from the couch. Not only was he far away from the entrance, the defendant concluded that Mr. Winthrop was holding a gun from his peripheral vision. There is no doubt that this killing was unjustified and that the death of Austin could have been avoided. The defense has reiterated that the defendant was emotionally and physically drained when he went back to his apartment on August 27, 2020. They claim that the defendant was tired, exhausted even after their shift that night. However, just because the defendant was tired and faced a string of angry text messages does not mean that they had an excuse to murder their upstairs neighbor. Being fatigued is not grounds for the justified killing of a harmless citizen. We are not charging Riley Costello with voluntary manslaughter, contrary to what the opening defense attorney stated. By charging the defendant with voluntary manslaughter, it is suggested that the defendant acted in unlawful self-defense, when in fact the defendant did not act in any form of self-defense because Sergeant Costello's life was never in any kind of danger. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, The results of this case are clear. The defendant, a police officer who swore to uphold the Constitution and to preserve the lives of citizens, instead chose to shoot Austin Winthrop with an intent to kill, despite having the resources and time to de-escalate the situation. My co-counsel and I have proved all elements for second-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt, and I respectfully request that the jury find Sergeant Riley Costello guilty of second-degree murder.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And closing for the defense, Mr. Van Ripper, you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the court. Have you ever been in a situation where you were tired, scared, anxious, and your fight or flight instincts kicked in while facing an unexpected situation in which you feared for your life? Well, this is the exact situation Officer Costello was in, all culminating in a tragic accident. Officer Costello is a model citizen and exemplary police officer who has displayed a sense of duty and responsibility while on the job. He has expressed no motive for committing this crime, and has even personally stated that he was fond of Austin and had a typical neighbor relationship. The prosecution carried the burden of proof, hence they had to prove without a reasonable doubt that the charges had been committed. The prosecution is charging the defendant with second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. Second-degree murder. These charges of second-degree murder require that the prosecution to prove that the defendant who killed Mr. Winthrop had the intent to kill Austin. However, Officer Costello did not intend to kill Mr. Winthrop, but instead of what he perceived to be a burglar. Additionally, they state that this killing is not justified. Yet, Officer Costello and numerous other witnesses and investigators stated that Officer Costello believed that their life was in danger, and that they thought they were in their own home, viewing what they saw was a burglar who they thought was pointing a armed weapon at them, and was refusing to comply with typical police demands. Secondly, the charge of voluntary manslaughter must be discussed. Voluntary manslaughter requires the prosecution to prove that the defendant who killed Mr. Winthrop had the intent to kill Austin and had been acting using their emotions exclusively. And once again, Officer Costello did not intend to kill Mr. Winthrop, but instead a burglar. And lastly, the claim that this killing was not justified without lawful excuse. Officer Costello had given this burglar a chance to identify themselves, but they did not respond, and thus they acted accordingly according to the police procedure. Additionally, the prosecution repeatedly said that Officer Costello did not follow the proper police procedure, but in fact, they did. Officer Costello had nowhere to retreat, no way to call for backup, so they did what they sought to do. They preserved their life. They did what their training indicated for them to do. Furthermore, the individual in the apartment was mistaken to be a burglar due to their dark clothing. This was highlighted in Solo's analysis of Exhibit 4. Officer Costello did not act irrationally in the presence of their emotions, but rather did what they were trained to do. Once again, they had to prove all these charges to be true without a single doubt in your mind. Has not a single doubt crossed your mind during this case? This was a case of self-defense. What happened here was a tragic accident. Officer Costello has testified that after increasing reports of robberies, he reasonably perceived Austin Winthrop was a burglar and his threat in his exhausted state, and believed that he was in his own home and did what his instincts and training told him to do in this particular situation. After this exhaustive investigation, we learned that the witness, Avery Solo, was clear in their testimony that Austin could have been perceived as a deadly threat. We also learned that Officer Solo saw it reasonable that Mr. Winthrop could have been perceived as a burglar. We know through numerous witness testimonies that a burglar was active in the building. Additionally, we confirmed that Officer Costello never witnessed the shooting, so all of their thoughts and ideas pertaining to the shooting are purely speculative. The evidence also shows that witness Emerson Palmer was clouding her bias towards Officer Costello and other police officers. She did not witness the events and had only allegedly heard the encounter. She only saw Officer Costello enter the room and only through a tiny little peephole. She did not physically see the events, and as a witness, she has no credible testimony against Officer Costello, besides her mentioned strong disliking of police officers and their bad relationship. Emerson Palmer additionally stated that there's a significant amount of crime within the apartment complex. I feel like nothing was done about this concerning crime. Emerson Palmer felt this way, as well as Officer Costello, with the confirmation by Mr. Stoll that this was a rampant problem. It is reasonable to see how a man in dark colors was perceived to be in your own apartment could be seen as a burglar. To wrap this up, Officer Dobbins has testified that both apartments were nearly identical, including their layout and paint color. Officer Dobbins has also stated that the two had worked long hours and that they had little experience of burglars in their own home. The prosecution additionally repeatedly cut off Ms. Dobbins and would not let her answer a question, attempting to coax her into an answer in which she did not believe. Your Honor, additionally, the prosecution frequently attempted to get Officer Still emotional, taunting them about the tragic accident. Yet Officer Still delivered a factual and honest responses. Officer Still has repeatedly stated that they responded how they were trained, and also stated they gave them the chance to surrender in the form of the phrase, "Stop police." And to wrap this all up, Officer Costello lives by the badge. They are a model police officer. Officer Costello withheld the duties of the badge, and they did what they were trained to do in the situation in which they were in. They preserved their own life, which is what they were told to do. Officer Costello, who has dedicated their life to their duties and their responsibilities. Our sympathies go out to Austin Winthrop. But what you're trying to do here is look at the facts and evidence, make a rational, educated decision on whether or not Mr. Costello committed second-degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. What happened here was a tragic accident. However, our feelings and sympathies absolutely cannot get intertwined with the facts of what happened here tonight, or happened that night. Your Honor, based on the evidence, witness testimony put forth, we implore you to find the defendant not guilty for the charges put towards them. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Ripper. And then Ms. Peters, would you like to deliver a brief rebuttal closing statement to finish out the trial?
Yes, Your Honor. First off, I would like to reiterate that we are not charging Sergeant Costello, Riley Costello, with voluntary manslaughter. We are charging her only with second-degree murder. The defense has brought forth that we are charging voluntary manslaughter when this is not true. In the defendant's testimony, he stated that no one could prepare you for that when he was referring to himself shooting Austin Winthrop. This is far from true, as the defendant has spent years training for confrontations and is even a part of the Special Weapons and Tactics Unit of the Holly Hills Police Department. The defendant also stated that I couldn't take cover. However, Lieutenant Solo established in his testimony that there were two different ways that could provide both cover and time to de-escalate the situation, not including leaving the apartment once Sergeant Costello realized something was off. Also, the defense has tried to establish that the prosecution witness, Emerson Palmer, was biased because Palmer doesn't trust police officers. However, Palmer's testimony was completely objective, and Palmer repeatedly stated that she does not harbor any feelings of ill will towards the defendant, and her testimony and witness statement are completely unbiased. Also, just because it was a burglar in the apartment, a proposed burglar, doesn't mean that Sergeant Costello had the right to shoot and feel threatened lethally. The punishment for burglary is not death. No further statements, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Counselor. This concludes our trial. We'll allow the jury to retire to deliberation and come back with a verdict afterwards. In the case of People, the Riley Costello Court is now in recess. Thank you, counselors on both sides.